All right. I think we're all logged in. Hi, everyone. Glad to have you all here. I'm thrilled you're joining us for our February Everyman Live. This is our monthly webinar program. My name is Dr. Abigail Rue, and I had such a good time hosting you all last month that I decided to share the fun this month, and I invited our guest from last month to co-host with me today. So for those of you that tuned in last month, you will recall that we had our CEO of EVRYMAN, Judson Kauffman, as our featured guest. He did a beautiful job being vulnerable and inspiring and authentic in our interview. If you missed it, you still can catch it on the platform if you're a member. And if you're a non-member, you can go to the EVRYMAN YouTube channel. So because he did such a great job on camera, I'm honored to have him share the spotlight with me. So let me introduce you and welcome my co-host, Judson Kauffman. Hi, Judson.
Hey, Abigail. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for letting me co-host with you. Good to
We're
be here.
delighted. So most of our listeners haven't had a chance to catch up with you, Judson, in the last month. We want to know what's on your mind, what's been in your head and your heart space. I think of, we're in the middle of winter. I feel like everywhere in the nation is getting some big storm. We've got Valentine's, Super Bowl. I mean, these are kind of February events. Where are you at? Tell us about what's gone on with Judson in the last month.
Yeah, thanks. Well, all those things. I'm a father of four, so Valentine's has been active, making all the goodies for school children with the kiddos. And then winter's interesting. January for me is sort of quiet, a lot of reflection, a lot of introspection, and then February is like, okay, what did we learn from all that? And what are we going to sort of bring into the year? Starting to kind of activate some of the things that hopefully percolated up in January. So for me, it's all about every man and growth of the company and doing more stuff for more guys around the country, and how to be a better dad, better husband, those kinds of things.
Those are important things. You had a lot on your mind this last month. I want to let our audience know that we've got the chat feature and we want you to tell us what's been on your mind. So we've got the chat feature for you to communicate with anybody, anytime, the other listeners here. So feel free to chat what's on your mind, or if you have a comment to anything that we're saying. Let me give some information about what we're going to talk about today and how the format works. So today's Everyman Live will be yet another informal, yet informative conversation with an expert. So whether you're a long-standing member of our Everyman community, or maybe this is your first time tuning in, you are welcome. These Everyman Lives are open to the public, they are open to females, and they're open to your involvement. So Judson, tell them how they can get involved without having their cat crossing the screen or their meal being recorded.
Yeah, so we want to maximize our time with our awesome guests. So the first portion, we'll be asking some questions of Dr. Spar here. You'll hear from him, and advice, guidance, failures, successes. If you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A feature in Zoom, which is different than the chat feature. And then any thoughts you have, you can share in the chat also. And then towards the end, we'll open it up for those questions.
Yeah. So the last 10 or 15 minutes is when you can type in your questions, listeners, anytime into the Q&A feature. Chat is for chatter, Q&A feature is for questions. And at the last 10 or 15 minutes is when we're going to pull from those. So post them anytime, but we'll wait to the end to post them. So just to clarify, listeners, you're not going to be asked to join a breakout group. You're not going to be caught eating your meal. This is just your time to listen and engage with the chat feature. Let's get to know our guest expert, Judson. Please introduce who we've got with us today.
Yeah, thank you. We have a longtime supporter and partner of EVRYMAN, most impressive and awesome dude, Dr. Myles Spar. Dr. Spar is the National Medical Director of And Health, a company that is improving access to whole person specialty care for patients with chronic diseases. Dr. Spar was born in Charleston, South Carolina, and went to the University of Michigan Medical School, where he worked as a humanitarian for Doctors Without Borders. In addition to his internal medicine training, he completed formal training in public health and health services at UCLA and integrative medicine at the University of Arizona, Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. He did all of this while also establishing and running a free integrative medicine program at a community clinic in the Los Angeles area. Dr. Spar has pursued his passion for root cause medicine through training in functional medicine and serving as the chair of the chair of the American Board of Integrative Medicine. As a clinician, researcher, author, teacher, speaker for multiple media outlets and on the TEDx stage, Dr. Spar went on to specialize in personalized medicine for patients, and he literally wrote the book on optimal performance and chronic illness. The book is called Optimal Men's Health, by the way.
I've got it. I want to show y'all. I bought it and I read it and I recommend it. I went on Amazon. That's where I find my books, wherever you get them. And I don't know how many females are reading Optimal Men's Health, but I learned a lot from it. It's relevant to all sorts of people. So some of the questions we're going to ask today are about Dr. Spar's book. Others are just about insights he have, but I just want to let you know it's great and worth its read. So Dr. Spar, in addition to all the things you just heard about, he advises NBA players, celebrities, and executives to maximize performance through optimizing their health. He has served as the chief medical officer and national medical director for Vault Health, but in 2022 joined And Health. He is also a clinical faculty member of the University of Arizona and the Academy for Integrative Health. All of that to say, Dr. Spar, what a treat it is to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time and lending us your expertise. And I want to start with question one.
Sure.
You've done a lot of stuff and you're a busy man and you're really passionate about optimizing men's health. Why? How did you even get into doing all this effort on this topic?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. So good to be here. Thank you so much. It's great for y'all to be here. I'm so proud for EVRYMAN to have y'all involved and to have Jed on as CEO. It's just been amazing. I like y'all said, I've been a supporter and it kind of helped out a little bit in some of the retreats with EVRYMAN for a long time. And it's just such an amazing, important organization. And with y'all doing these and with Jed at the helm, it's so exciting. Anyway, so how did I get into this? So I went to regular medical school, like you said, very conventional medical school training. Basically, as doctors, when we graduate from medical school, we know how to take care of really sick patients in the hospital, and that's kind of about it. We don't really need to help. We don't learn anything about how to guide people in staying healthy, how to guide wellness. We know how to tell them, well, when you get really sick, come see me. I got you. And in the US, we are great at treating really, really sick people. We suck at helping people stay out of the hospital, stay away from the doctors, helping them understand what they can do to participate in their own healthcare. So something in me was just frustrated by that from the beginning. And then I think a couple things solidified my work in this field. One was, like you said, I went and did Doctors Without Borders. I did that partly out of altruism, and it's an amazing humanitarian organization, but partly because I was like, by the way, can I say like bad words on this?
You have permission. You can.
Okay.
We're adults.
Awesome. So I was just like, fuck this. All I've learned is how to take care of really sick people. That isn't why I went to medicine. I'm going to go somewhere where they have really sick people. I was just like, I had gotten an MPH. I did all these things to try and figure out how to get my passion for really helping people figure out how do they participate in their own health to be able to do that. And I couldn't find an outlet, honestly, in the US at that point. So I went abroad and then I saw, wait a minute, all these people in other countries, I worked in 3 or 4 different countries for various times, and they needed us. They were sick, but they weren't as sick as I would have thought they would have been. And I was like, why is that? Why are they thriving more than this person with the exact same disease has in the US? We're treating HIV and TB and other conditions. And I started thinking, what are they doing? They're eating naturally. They're not eating a lot of ultra-processed foods. They're very active. They have to be to get water. They have to walk a mile to get water and bring it back and carry it. They had a lot of strength in communities, a lot of faith and meaning and purpose in their lives and a reason for thriving. All these things that I realized had to have something to do with thriving, none of which I learned about in medical school. Not one. We literally had I think our nutrition training was, these are the RDAs for vitamins. It was like one hour lecture in 4 years. And nothing about connection, about physical activity. If you could put exercise in a pill, it would be a blockbuster, right? And we didn't learn about any of that. Yet these people were active. So I came back and really that's when I started implementing this integrative medicine training. What's the science to a more whole person, mind, body, spirit approach? That's what integrative and functional medicine's about. So I did training in that. And then I saw when I was doing that, no men were coming. It was all women that were coming. And this was free, like you said, at a free clinic. So cost wasn't the issue. And I was like, what is this about? Why are we seeing only women that seem to care about their health, seem to think preventively, think, how do I do things now to not get some disease years later? And I started realizing the messaging about wellness isn't resonating with guys. And what is it about guys that they don't hear that? And really started getting interested in how underserved men were by the kind of wellness community. Um, so I think that was a big part of it. And then when I started really looking at the men that were there, that's when I started realizing there's so much to men's health that isn't being addressed. It was this concern, the feeling was like everything that isn't specifically women's health must be men's health. I'm like, no, there are actually specific men's health issues, and there was nothing really about how to really address those. Again, this was back before COVID, before there was a little bit more of an appreciation of the unique health needs of men. So that's really what kind of spurred me to start to look at how do we get men to kind of wake up and listen to some of these messages and realize what it could mean for them in terms of their own lifespan. And I'll say the last thing, and then I'll shut up for a second, is what got me the final linchpin in me really committing to men's health was seeing the statistics. Men win at 9 of the top 10 causes of preventable early death. We are dying younger than women, and that isn't genetically pre-programmed. That is absolutely related to lifestyle and related to things we can be doing that women are doing better than us at. The only thing women die younger than men at is from Alzheimer's. Everything, and that's for other reasons. We are winning at cardiovascular disease, at obesity, at general fitness, at all sorts of cancers. So anyway, that's a long answer to that.
I loved it. And I hate the phrase winning
Right.
at losing. I mean, these are not the things you want to win in, but I can see why if you saw that 9 out of 10 of the reasons people are dying, men are winning at, that would be a cause of an alarm. And we're so thankful you've taken this on and are shouting it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Jed, go ahead.
Yeah, well, at least we got some points on the board, right? I mean, something.
Yes.
Myles, so it's, it seems like guys are stuck. In your book, you talk about guys being stuck in the man box, which is a term thrown around. My intuition says that these 9 reasons you mentioned have a lot to do with that stuckness. Can you kind of talk about that and what you've seen as sort of really being connected? It's clearly not diet or access to medicine in America. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we look at it, that everybody knows and everyone has heard, the I'd say the first level is really, the societal pressure to be a man and to what does that mean? And this bastardization of what stoicism means, as opposed to what the ancient
Yeah.
Stoics meant it to mean. Now we take it to mean this John Wayne bullshit version of don't share emotion, don't share any vulnerability, don't share weakness, don't share, right? And so that's kind of the first level, that puts us in this position of not asking for help when we need it and not being able to actually, like Brene Brown talks about, the antidote to shame is to be vulnerable. And we've kind of taken away that antidote by saying we're not going to be vulnerable. So therefore we're going to keep the shame all inside. And everyone's thinking the same thing about how shameful they feel they are, but they can't express it. So they don't know the other guy's feeling that. So that's kind of the first level. And I think there's been a lot of talk and writing, and probably the listeners here are sophisticated enough they've heard all that. I think what we're realizing now is there's even a deeper level, and it's really about kind of awareness of self and a waking up to what am I here for? It's about consciousness. And I know that sounds really woo-woo, but it's really like conscious about what are you uniquely here to do? What can you contribute? And being in touch with that and then living your life in line with that. Some of the stuff you talked about eloquently when you were interviewed on this. And I think that's the more important level is as men, somehow we weren't raised to look at those issues, and it has to do with self-compassion and self-love. And I know that's a woo, but it really has to do with like, who are you? Why do you wake up in the morning? In Japanese, they call it ikigai. And
Yeah.
Blue Zones showed if you have a clear and you've thought about it and you have to think about it, it doesn't just automatically come to you. It's journaling, it's meditating, it's talking to other men and other people and being like, what am I good at? What turns me on? What, when I'm doing that, I feel like, all right, this is like in flow. This is the right direction. And getting some sense to scan for that, right? And I think we hadn't been trained to do that. Somehow, I don't know, Abigail, you can tell us, did some sister or mother tell you to do that? Because our dads and brothers and mentors never told us to do that. They told us that's a waste of time, by and large. And I think when you do that, then taking that next step and actually living life in accordance with that, which again, a lot of us don't do. We feel like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm great at blank and that turns me on, but I got to do this other thing. Um, because we're not willing to explore that. And so I think all these things are because we haven't had really role models to show us that by and large, and this is generalizing, about how do we really figure out what turns us on and move in that direction. I think that that has put us into this box and then made us feel shameful because we inherently feel what I'm doing just isn't like what I know I would be great at, but I don't really know how to express that or who I can share it with. And so that's where Everyman, again, there's not an ad for Everyman, but that's where Everyman's so important because I think it is busting that man box saying, no, we all, guess what? We all feel that way.
Yeah.
That guy that looks so confident, those NBA players I've worked with, they all feel that way. I promise you. I remember seeing one of them in the gym. He was literally lifting up his shirt, looking in the mirror at his like 12 pack. And I was trying to joke with him. I was like, how's it look? And he's like, still needs work. And I was like, okay, first of all, you have no sense of humor because I was kind of joking. So lighten up. Secondly, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of deep insecurity there.
yes,
And
exactly.
you're seeing what I'm hearing you say is there's a direct line from chronic illness to what you've just discussed, which is men not being open, not being secure, not understanding what their ikigai is, not having some connection to what I call the spiritual realm, right?
Exactly. Well, actually, in the blue zones, if anyone's seen Dan Buettner, who wrote about the blue zones, the places people live over 100 years old, he showed he's a National Geographic journalist, but they did research. If you have that clear sense of purpose, you live 7 years longer. That's how connected to chronic illness and mortality it is. A clear sense of purpose, having that ikigai, writing it down, knowing it, knowing your North Star was associated with living 7 years longer. So absolutely. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
the other way, just to really quick add to that, which we can get into, but I think we know trauma affects chronic illness, right? We know trauma lives in the body. It affects your immune system. It affects autoimmune disease. Do you know men are catching up with women in autoimmune diseases? It used to be it was women by and large that got autoimmune disease. Men hardly did. We're catching up. Another like, yeah, we're getting points on
Great,
the board.
great. Get more
Awesome.
points on the board.
And I do think it's partly related to this idea of trauma. Trauma doesn't have to be, God forbid, you've been through major sexual molestation or abandonment or incarceration, unnecessary, all these. It could be little t trauma and it could be generations ago. We can talk about that. I know that was one of the things that we always talked about. That affects you and affects your immune system. It affects your metabolism, it affects your blood sugar because it affects your metabolism. All of that affects what's called genetic expression. And so I do think keeping all this in is traumatizing. When you feel shameful, that's traumatizing, and that is coming out in chronic illness.
So we've
Thanks for that.
been going kind of big picture with data and stats, and I want to bring it down to the very specific example. So Dr. Spar, can you give us an example of a patient who came into your office, presented with certain illnesses, and through your suggestions and their implementation, turned it around? And tell us how that process happens. Give us like a single success story.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, let's talk about autoimmune disease. So at Ant Health, we treat a lot of patients with autoimmune disease. So I had a guy with what's called psoriatic arthritis. So psoriasis, you've probably seen the ads Christy Lauper does with all the plaques all over. That affects your skin, but most people with psoriasis often have impact in their joints. And so a lot of pain, especially pain around the joints. And so it's called psoriatic arthritis. Very painful, affects quality of life. You don't want to go out because of your skin and your scalp, and you can't move and exercise. There are medications that are very effective at treating that. They're called biologics. They're very powerful. That's what you see advertised on TV. So I had a guy who was suffering. Skin looked horrible. Scalp looked horrible. Like on his face, on his scalp flaking. Couldn't wear anything like other than all white because you would see it on his clothes. Major pain. He was like, I'm not going on a biologic because that's weak. I was raised that you take care of things yourself. You don't go in and, get the easy fix. I know I can work through this. I know I've read about how much I can be doing. And yes, I'm an integrative doc. I want you to participate. I want to change your diet and work on stress management, sleep. That will absolutely help. But when you're that severe, it's not going to do all the lifting for you. And he literally had been told, you know, this will absolutely prevent damage to your joints by going on this medication. And he was like, that was like literally a failure for him to start a medication. So it was really talking about, and I know doctors don't do this enough. It's like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about where you got that from. It doesn't take hours. Just let's talk about that. And the most important thing is let's turn it around. There's a person, Byron Katie, who does these questions. She does something called The Work, and there are other people too. It's like turn that thought you have up completely 180 degrees and just what if actually it was a source, it was not a source, but it looked like a strength for you to get help when you needed it. What would you feel if that were the case? Could that be possible that that were the case? And by exploring that with him, literally it takes 15 minutes. This doesn't take hours. He was like, oh, I could see how, you know, that would actually show people around me that I was willing to ask for help. I see how my wife has tried to help me, and I've been like, no, 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 I got this, and that's shut her out. Like we started looking at how are you cheating other people from getting close to you by not letting them help you, and when you will help them, but you won't help yourself. And just looking at that a little bit and stuff again that every man does. So he was finally willing to start this medication. And not that medications are like the saving grace for everything, but in this case, it was dramatic. I mean, he was like, my skin hasn't looked like this since I was 21 years old. I can get to the gym. Because he had been going to the gym, but he was in pain for 3 days every time he go to the gym. He's like, I can go to the gym and then I can go to the gym again the next day. Like I haven't been able to do that in years. So yes, we worked on diet and lifestyle and all that, and hopefully he won't need the medicine forever, but at least he was able to see it as something that could help him and be a strength in saying, yeah, I'm willing to bring in outsiders to help me and not a weakness.
That's amazing that he would be willing to, it's like no one had even told him. I mean, in 15 minutes, if he went from I'm toughing it out to, okay, I'm actually going to lean into this advice. It's amazing if that's really kind of all it took was to unlock the viewpoint, how accessible this could be, you know, to everybody.
Yeah, no question. I experienced it in my life. Miles, 2019, started leaning into a little bit of the woo-woo stuff. Just got into meditation, started praying. Prior to that, I was an atheist, but thought I'd invite it in. Life was tough. Ended up having a remarkable year. And that's the last year I've taken a single pharmaceutical. I mean, even Tylenol, ibuprofen, haven't taken anything since then, haven't needed it, right? If I feel crappy, I go for a hike or go meditate, or sit down and pray or journal, right? This stuff works really well. And engaging with people. I didn't realize how much solitude or how much loneliness I felt by just, putting the headphones on and diving into work. It's like going out, hanging out with guys, hanging out with other folks went a long way.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have, like I said, it doesn't have to be about convincing someone to get on a medicine. It's convincing someone to get a coach to train you on diet, on stress management, on spiritual, work that could help. Anything, we aren't born with the ability to know all the ways we can optimize our health. We need help with that. Every professional athlete gets help from their coaches and their managers and everybody else, and we don't feel like they're weak for that. We all need just some expertise around how we can optimize our life and our health, and asking for that makes us stronger, not weaker.
Yeah, I heard a doctor the other day, some random doctor on social media. I have no idea who this person was, but I've heard this before, so I want to ask you about it. She said 90% of chronic illness is directly related to stress.
I
Is
was
that number accurate? What have you seen?
I wouldn't say to stress. I'd say 90% to lifestyle, yes, which is like think about that for a second, right? It's shocking because we all think, oh, you're genetically screwed. You have these genes you're going to get. No, genes are responsible for, yeah, roughly, let's say 10% of your risk of getting a disease, not 100%. So 90% is lifestyle. I wouldn't say that's all stress. I think a lot of it's diet. A lot we hear about ultra processed foods and all of that, and alcohol, which we can talk about, and a lot of that is sleep, and issues with sleep and hydration and all this other, but stress is a big, big part of that as well, for sure. And that's proven. I mean, the stress, you can measure stress, right? There are a couple ways to measure stress. One is cortisol, which is a blood test or a salivary test or urine test, or you can measure something called heart rate variability, and we can get more into that if you want to. And there are lots of studies showing how much someone who's under stress by measuring it that way absolutely has impact on their brain, on cognitive decline, on early cognitive decline and brain aging. The cortisol there's an androgenic hormone called DHEA that's really important. Your cortisol to DHEA ratio literally determines how toxic stress is to your brain cells. So that male hormone is actually protective against cortisol in the brain, but cortisol is toxic to the brain, that stress hormone. So lots of brain effects, but also on the physical body and on causing oxidative damage, which, we hear about antioxidants. The opposite of an antioxidant is stress. It's an oxidant.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
You
Go ahead, Jetson.
mentioned alcohol. I wanted to jump on it. I've got a background in the alcohol industry. I drink very little these days because I just discovered it doesn't do you much good, but every now and then a glass of wine is pretty nice, or a cold beer. The Surgeon General recently put out a warning about cancer and alcohol and that correlation. And I think you talked about it in your book. Can you talk more about sort of the red wine and how that can be a healthy component of your diet, and any thoughts on the Surgeon General's perspective?
Yeah, well, it's changed a little bit. So I wrote the book in 2020, and it's actually changed a little since then. So when I was in med school, we actually learned that alcohols could be good for you, like you said, red wine, right? And that 1 to 2 drinks for a male, 0 to 1 drinks, let's say 1 drink for a female, is totally fine, even maybe beneficial. Well, it turns out that is not really true. Yeah, there's some good ingredients in red wine, but the alcohol effect overtakes the beneficial, and you can get those same what are called polyphenols and a lot of other things. You don't need to get them in addition to alcohol. And so highly recommend the polyphenols in green tea, even in dark chocolate. 70% are more dark, but not necessarily in red wine, because we've seen the data come out, like the Surgeon General report showed, that a little bit of alcohol, it's not necessarily going to kill you, but it's not good for you, number one. So don't kid yourself. And the more you drink, the more it's not good for you. So there is a higher risk of cancer. That's what his report talked about, specifically 7 different kinds of cancer, but also cardiovascular disease and dementias and memory brain issues. And it's pretty directly correlated with the more you drink. So, if you have 2 or 3 drinks with the guys once a month when you're playing cards, whatever, not a big deal. Like the connection you get from that is probably more healthful than any negative from 2 or 3 drinks once a month. But if you're having 2 to 3 drinks every day, absolutely that increases cancer risk, it increases heart disease risk, it increases dementia risk. Where to draw the line is really a personal thing, and it depends on your other risk factors, because even one a day is going to have some impact on your health. I think one big thing we don't think about is metabolic health. The number one killer of anyone, men and women, is cardiovascular disease, right? Over half of us are overweight or have high blood sugar. And like a typical old fashioned is like 200 calories, so it's not nothing. So it's metabolized in a way that it doesn't turn into energy. It just goes right to fat. It goes right into the liver, causes fatty liver. We see a giant increase in fatty liver. So again, a little bit fine. Just like I'll eat, at a fast food restaurant once a quarter, maybe. But having it all the time, don't think that it's healthy to have a glass every day. It just isn't.
Yeah, and the alcohol kills a lot of the healthy bacteria in your gut biome too, right? Is that
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It absolutely does. Yep. And the metabolites called alcohol dehydrogenase really have a lot of impact, and women have less of that. So that's why women can handle less alcohol in terms of health effects, why they get those health negative effects quicker than men, because we have usually more of this alcohol dehydrogenase. But even once it's metabolized, those metabolites cause problems in the gut for sure, and in the liver and other organs.
Well,
one
thank you.
one last note? Sorry, Ab, and I know you got a question. I see you burning. Um, I haven't seen data, but I have this strong intuition, sort of being intimate with the alcohol industry, that some alcohols come from a plant that's been covered in pesticides and herbicides, right? Most whiskeys are corn that is grown industrially, and you can't get rid of those chemicals. So even through distillation, by the time you're drinking that glass of tequila, even agave is farmed.
Yeah.
You're putting down pesticides and herbicides,
Yeah.
and so I'm sure that's weighing in on the cancer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton that we're learning about environmental exposures to all sorts of things. So yeah, I think number one, just what you said about the pesticides and about how much that destroys our gut bacteria. Because what you'll hear from industry is, well, we've studied that pesticides are not toxic to human to your human cells, but they are toxic to our gut, which then causes a lot of downstream toxicity. Glyphosate is very toxic to gut cells and causes what's called leaky gut. And then you add to that some of the sugars, like you mentioned, agave and tequila. Well, that's fructose, right? Fructose is a major cause of this metabolic dysfunction we see, of problems with mitochondrial function, of problems with diabetes and blood sugar issues. All of that has to do with fructose. That's what high fructose corn syrup. So fructose is causing a lot of these problems of energy and metabolism, body and brain energy that we have. And that comes from agave is all fructose. It's not healthy to use agave syrup, by the way. Honey, a lot of a lot of the things put in drinks. You have a rum and Coke. Oh my God, talk about like tons of high fructose corn syrup. Plus, God knows what the sugar cane came from. Yeah, it's not the healthiest. But again, I don't want to take away from every once in a while. It's enjoyable. Like you were in the distillery world. I mean, I have a drink every now and then for sure. I think there's, you know, it's all about balance. You can't stress yourself out, but it depends on your other risks and what are your goals. Are you an elite athlete? Then there's no role for alcohol. Are you somebody who has a really healthy life and eats healthy and tries to not have ultra processed foods? Then you've bought yourself a lot of reserve to then, have a little more balance and cheat a little bit and have something because your body's able to metabolize it and get rid of it and detoxify it.
Thanks. Okay, Ab.
So you touched on this earlier, and I have it written down because it's a quote from your book. So I'm staying on the topic of your book, and I have to say it was the most. I read it twice. I may even have to read it twice to the audience. It was the most interesting statement for which I had never heard before, and so perhaps this is revealing my ignorance, but maybe it's going to resonate with the audience as like what, and it's awesome. So I'm going to read the sentence. This is from your book. Your engagement in mindfulness or other mind-body practices can make your future children and grandchildren more resilient and relaxed by nature. I'm going to read it again. My engagement in my mindfulness and my mind-body practices affects my grandchildren's resilience and relaxed nature.
Yeah.
Expand on this multi-generational. My mindfulness affects many generations.
Absolutely. So it's called epigenetics, which some of your listeners, might have heard of, right? So again, when I was in med school, I was taught you have genes. Once you have it, that's it. That gene's going to get expressed. So if you have a gene for low vitamin D, you're going to have low vitamin D. If you have a gene for heart disease risk, you're going to have a heart attack. If you have a gene for detox issues, you're going to have. But no, what we found out is you turn on and off different genes based on your lifestyle. So you might have a really bad deck of cards in terms of your genes. Yet, if you live a very healthy life, you will actually turn off some of those bad genes and you won't have the diseases your ancestors had. So we've also know that some of those switches that turn genes on and off are very powered by what you eat. And so that's called nutrigenomics, but also stress. So there's been a lot of work done at Harvard by the Herbert Benson Center that looked at this impact of doing what's called mindfulness to elicit the relaxation response, where cortisol comes down, you're in what's called a parasympathetic state, you're chill, you're not in fight or flight mode. That actually tells the body, including your DNA, everything's under control. So let's turn on the genes around maintenance, around our immune system functioning, our gut functioning. We don't need to just be responding and reacting to every crisis. And that over time keeps those genes turned on that are more clearing good stuff out, clearing out the bad stuff out of your body and doing all the maintenance stuff. So then that actually affects both your eggs and sperm as women and men in terms of what genes are kind of automatically turned on and off when those sperm and eggs get produced. With women, remember, you are born with all the eggs you're ever going to have. And so it's really even stronger as it relates to what was going on in the biologic mother and the biologic grandmother. And some studies have borne this out. They've shown, for example, in Holocaust survivors of major trauma, their grandchildren had more anxiety, had more issues, actually had more propensity to obesity because the genes to store fuel were upregulated because they didn't get food for 4 years. And so those who survived, their genes to store whatever little food they had as much as possible and to eke it out as fuel to allow them to survive got passed down to generations. So their grandchildren had a higher stress response, but also higher risk of obesity because those storage genes are still turned on, all based on the genes that had been programmed to be on or off generations ago.
That's fascinating. I certainly knew that we had the ability in our own lifespan to turn on or keep triggered off certain genes. I didn't realize that they would then pass down through our eggs and sperm
Yeah.
to future generations. So mindfulness is not a selfish practice. It's helping
Right.
your
Do it for
offspring
your
from multiple.
progeny. Right.
Yeah,
That would be a great
that's
bumper sticker.
amazing.
Do it for your progeny. I love
Right,
it.
do all the things for the next generation, for the multiple generation. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jed.
Well, talking about sperm, I think about testosterone, which comes up with any group of guys, especially guys who, like me, are starting to see testosterone slowly declining as I get my blood work done, once or twice a year. And so, personally, I've been looking at testosterone replacement therapy. I've opted for some different, natural supplements to try to see it pick up. But can you talk about testosterone replacement therapy, your perspective? One kind of specific thing that comes to mind is a lot of guys will do sort of these doc in the box testosterone kits, and then they see an awesome spike early and then a drop, and then they're actually worse off for several days than they were before they started. And then they get their shot back, they spike, and so they're up and down. Um, how can guys think about this responsibly and from a healthy kind of holistic point of view?
Yeah, there's a lot to this. I mean, I teach this to doctors and stuff, so there's a lot. But I would say a couple things. Number one, like you said, you notice with age it goes down. So testosterone naturally declines with age. The number one risk factor for low T, let's say T to shorten things, is age. That doesn't mean you just let it go down to negligible, right? That would be like telling someone when they get cataracts, well, you get cataracts when you get old. That's just how it goes. Don't get the cataract taken care of. So makes me crazy. A lot of doctors will say that, yeah, your T goes down with age. You're like, but I'm gaining belly fat. I feel like crap. I can't get erections. I'm losing muscle mass. Well, that's what happens. No, okay. So don't accept that. Go to another doctor if they say that. Okay. If you're having symptoms, you don't just treat a number. So if your T is just low, but you feel great, muscle mass is good, energy is good, libido is good, you don't necessarily have to treat it. But if it's really low, it's actually correlated with mortality and cardiovascular disease. So we're talking like under 300 is the standard of total testosterone. That absolutely should be addressed. If it's in the normal range on the lower end, don't stress it if you don't have symptoms, right? So don't even necessarily check it if you don't have symptoms. But symptoms are things you might not realize. Depression, losing muscle mass, gaining belly fat, even though you're working out the same and you're getting something going on around the belly, feeling moody in general, brain fog, low energy, low libido, erectile issues. So for most men, if they know they're going to notice some of those symptoms, it's worth getting checked. When you get it checked, whether you check it yourself or ask your doctor, the biggest mistake I see is people just get a total testosterone check, and that's wholly insufficient. You're going to miss over half the time when T is actually low, because what matters is what's called free T or bioavailable T. How much testosterone do you have that can really do its job and bind to what are called receptors? So when you're getting a test, make sure it's checking not just the total, but either free or bioavailable. And to do that, it has to measure the proteins that bind up most of the testosterone, called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. You don't need to worry about that. Just know to ask for either a free or bioavailable T. That's what really matters. And you got to check your estradiol, which is the form of estrogen that can actually block it doesn't really block physically, but it basically blocks testosterone's actions in a way. And high estradiol causes a lot of the same symptoms as low T. And so a lot of times T might be okay, but your estradiol might be high. And as men, we do have estrogen. We don't have as much as women, but we do have it, and we want a little bit. You don't want it down to zero, no matter what the gym buddy that's giving you blocker medications says. You need a little estrogen to protect your bones and your heart. But if it's too high, it causes all those same symptoms I just listed for low T, but you treat it differently. And the reason that's so important to check that estradiol is fat tissue, it's called adipose tissue, actually turns T into estrogen. It has an enzyme called aromatase, and adipose tissue is aromatizing. It turns T into estradiol. And guess what? Over half of us are overweight. And so our adipose tissue is turning our T into estrogen. And you get this vicious cycle where you have high estrogen, that creates lower T, that makes more fat tissue to turn more of the T you do have into estrogen. So get it all checked. So that's number one. And then it absolutely makes sense to treat either that high estradiol or that low T if you have those symptoms. Not only is it safe to do, I think it's really important for quality of life and even longevity to treat it. Because like I said, really low T is correlated with literally early death.
So how do you treat it? There's pellets, there's syringes,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how do you avoid the sort of up and down? If you get a shot on Sunday and by Thursday you're tanked.
Right, right, right. Well, you do it under the guidance of somebody who really knows what they're doing and they're checking. And so when you start out, you're getting tested regularly to see what's right for you. In terms of the methods, yeah, there's topicals, there are pellets, there are regular injections that are sub-Q, meaning like a little needle under your skin, or intramuscular. There are now oral formulations that are very good. There's even an intranasal formulation that you really need to discuss with your clinician because there are pros and cons to each of them. There just are. There's no right for everybody. Um, and then you have to get it measured. Most people use the injectable, more and more using the oral. The oral are great. There are 3 brands out there that are really good. The only main downside is you got to do it twice a day with food. Most guys, I know, not to generalize or piss anybody off, they're going to forget that second
Yeah.
dose. So that's the thing is, are you really committed to taking that second dose? And then, yeah, you get your level checked and make sure you're on the right dose. Now, if you're doing injections, that's where you can get what you're talking about, the up and down. Because if you're doing it every day, especially twice a day, you're going to get a nice even level. Pellets, nice even level. The injections, you're right, you're going to get peak and trough. So what you need to do is get it measured after you start, the day after you inject, and then measure it again. I know it's a pain in the butt because you got to get blood tests a lot the day before you inject. And so you're measuring your peak and your trough to see, do you need to adjust the dose or do you need to do it twice a week instead of once a week? It's very individualized. Think about like thyroid medicine. If any of you know people on thyroid medicine, everyone's on a different dose. That's another hormone. When you're dealing with hormones, it's not like an ibuprofen where one dose is the same for everybody. It's testosterone, the same thing. Even those oral pills, they come in multiple different doses. So you got to get it measured after you start it. If it's a daily thing, it doesn't matter when you measure it. But if it's an injection, you got to measure that peak right after you inject and then a trough right before your next injection to see which is it. Do I need to adjust the dose or do I need to adjust what's called the interval and do it like twice a week instead of once a week?
Okay.
Sorry, I know it's confusing. It's a lot. That's why I worry about the ones online that you're not really meeting with someone that can go through it with you. I highly recommend I love virtual care. We do a lot of virtual care, but it needs to be with somebody who's a clinician who can talk to you about what's good for Judd, which form and when are we going to test it, and not just do like an at-home test and then start something.
Yeah. So short answer is you're pro testosterone replacement. Don't take shortcuts.
Right, exactly. Absolutely not. Once you're on it, maybe then invest up front and somebody who really gets you dialed in. And then if it's too expensive to continue that, find a cheaper way to continue it after you're already dialed in, because probably you're going to be able to stay around on the same regimen for a while. So you don't necessarily need to keep that cadence up. You could, as long as you can get that prescription filled, you could keep on the same one. But for that beginning to figure out what's the right form and what's the right dose, you really need someone to spend some time with you and check a few data points to see.
Got it.
I want to give a chance for our listeners to get some of their questions asked. We've got about 10 minutes left with Dr. Spar. So remember, you can go to the Q&A icon and post your questions. I'm going to read one because I think it connects with everyone. So if any listeners, you can still post. We've got about 10 more minutes. I'm walking in the morning. I'm doing yoga. I'm mindful what I put on my body. I take multivitamins. What else can I do? So to me, the question is for every listener here, Dr. Spar, what's one piece of advice that could get us started in making a better choice today?
Yeah, and this person, you said they're walking. What else are they doing for exercise?
They
Anything
said
else?
they were walking, taking multivitamins. Where did it just go? Yeah, they're walking, doing yoga, taking multivitamins. They want to know kind of what's a next, doable baby step.
All right, could I ask, because exercise is number one, right? I mean, number one, like I said, if you could put what exercise does in a pill, blockbuster, right? So an exercise should have 4 different components for the way I look at it. You want some cardio, so cardiovascular, doing 150 minutes a week at least of some kind of walking is fine, as long as it's brisk enough that it's at least like what we call zone 2, where you're getting your heart rate up a little bit. And then you want to do some kind of strength training, keep your muscles strong, your bones strong, You want to do some flexibility and some core work. Those are kind of the four main elements. So yoga incorporates a little core work, a little strength in terms of body weight resistance, and certainly flexibility. And then the walking, if it's brisk enough, is a little cardio. But the other part of cardio for most people, for cardiovascular benefit, for weight management, is like an interval training at least once or twice a week, where you're getting that heart rate up and then down. That helps a lot with burning fat, with keeping, again, your heart strong. It could be just a couple times a week at least doing some intervals. There's no, from what I've seen, right or wrong intervals. There's the Norwegian 4x4. There's like the Tabata. There are different versions, but a big, I think it's really important to have all those. So that's number one. The multi might be good, it might be not good. So a lot of supplements out there are not good. We have a lot of crap out there in supplements. You got to do a little research or talk to someone who knows what's a good quality multivitamin, because all the multivitamin studies show that they don't do anything. That's because they studied crappy multivitamins. Ideally, you're checking to see what you need. So you're, again, I'm really into data. What's your vitamin D level, your magnesium level, your zinc level, and do you really need all those things? Can you get it from food? It's always better to get it from food. Can you eat all the colors of the rainbow during the week and eat as organically as possible? Great. If not, a multivitamin is a good insurance policy. And then the last thing I would say is talking to someone who knows about potentially other supplements that could be helpful. Again, because our food's pretty depleted in its nutritional value, unfortunately, unless you're really proactive, you might need fish oil, you might need some other nutrients to help balance out what you're getting. And then stress management would be the last thing. Yoga, if that's for this person, perfect. Like I mentioned, measuring stress, you can measure it with, I have an Oura ring, or you can have a Whoop band or an Apple Watch or something on your phone. Check out your stress level and try and do something every day that makes it feel like everything's under control, even if it isn't. Just for 5 minutes, breath work or meditation or mindfulness or prayer or journaling, hugely important to get your body down. Then the last thing I'll say is sleep. So you got to look at your sleep. Most of us aren't getting enough. That's a huge disadvantage for weight management, for risk for disease. So look at optimizing sleep.
Thank you.
When you think about sleep and exercise, oftentimes there's a trade-off for guys. You mentioned exercise is kind of the top priority. How do you think about that? The verses.
About sleep. But sleep and exercise?
Yeah. So,
God, I have to pick one. Oh my gosh.
or how do you think about it?
I think they're both really important, honestly. And I think, they both help each other out. Obviously, if you're not well rested, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck from exercise. But typically when you exercise, you're going to sleep better. So I think they kind of go hand in hand. The timing, though, might be different for each person. Some people, if they exercise too hard late at night, then it revs them up. So you want to make sure that you see how you do with that and not, mess up your sleep. But if it's like, I mean, maybe if what you're getting at is, wow, I just have so little time. So like I can't get 8 hours and get my workout in. Um, that's a tough one. I would say get at least 7 hours and get your workout in. I think if it's a choice between 7 hours or workout, you got to get your 7 hours. I feel like almost all of us need 7 hours of sleep.
I'm going to follow up on this question from a member, because you talked about when we were talking about distilleries and alcohol, you said agave is not so great. So here's the question that's kind of probing more. Dr. Spar mentioned fructose being an issue. Can he talk more about how honey can fit into this problem? I use honey as a sweetener, primarily for morning drinks. Would maple syrup be a better option? Are there other ways for sweeteners that you can rank them according to good and bad of our body?
Oh wow. So yeah, honey is not pure fructose. It's a mix of sugars. So it's not as bad as like agave, which is pretty much pure fructose. Um, but it has more fructose than I think than maple syrup. I'd have to look and see. So probably maple syrup is a little bit better, but it's all about just quantity. Don't stress out about the more you stress about it, that's going to be worse. I would say try and just limit how much you use. Could you have coffee without it? What about that? What about half? Yeah, I don't care what you do. If you're doing like half a teaspoon, it doesn't matter. It's such a little amount. So the difference is so little, it's more important that you just decrease it if you can. But probably maple syrup's a little bit better than the honey. And the honey's a little bit better than the agave.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. We probably have time for one or two more questions. Judson, you want to pull one from the list?
Yeah, let me see here. Myles, there's tons of experts and doctors with podcasts, things like that. Any that you really recommend folks who are dialed in with a holistic view and know what they're talking about?
Yeah, I think I mean, Peter Attia, I mean, they're long, it's an investment, but I trust him. He knows what he's talking about. He has a lot of really good guests. So I think he knows what he's doing. Not a podcast, but a book, Breath by James Nestor, I think is
Yeah.
really great, about breathing and like mind blowing what he talks to. And so he's a guest on a lot of podcasts. Rhonda Patrick is great for fitness. I trust her. She's really good, very approachable. She knows what she's talking about. Um, Not always health, but a lot of health related is Rich Roll. I'm
Yeah.
not vegan, but I'm very plant forward. He's very, vegan proponent, but he doesn't not interview non-vegan. He's not, yeah, all black and white about it. He's a great interviewer and has a lot of really good health people. So anybody he has on there, mostly I trust, and he asks really good questions. Um, yeah, and then Tim Ferriss always has good people. Again, he's a lot more than health, but I think his health stuff is good.
Good tips. This is the kind of webinar that all of us are going to watch again because it's coming at us so fast with so much great information, particularly this tidbit on. So I'm going to be like, great, I didn't have to write that down. I can go and watch the recording.
Let me mention one book though, because it's
Oh,
a
sure.
thin book and it's something I just read recently, and I don't know if it's getting much attention. And it's this guy Boyd Vardy. Have you seen his book, A Lion Tracker's Guide to Life? And I don't know him. I get no money from him or anything. Boyd, if you're out there, it speaks to what I was saying at the beginning of how do you know if you're in line with what just resonates with you? And so he's a lion tracker and he writes about how do you track a lion? And the metaphor is all how do you figure out what really is your flow? What turns you on? Because a lot of it's when you talk about figure out what your main purpose is, it's like, that's a big thing to ask. He writes, it's 100 pages and has illustrations. It's easy to get through. Literally, he writes is very eloquent about just you don't know where you're going, but you know what it feels like to be on the right path. You know what that next step feels like when it's the right step. So that's the only other thing I want to recommend to people because I just feel like it's been really helpful in freeing me up from this big, what is my ikigai? What's my purpose? Just what does it feel like just to be on the right path?
Thank you for the tips.
Thanks for that. You started with that idea at the beginning of the call here, Myles, and I appreciate it because I think when I think about what Everyman is doing and a lot of other organizations, but for us particularly, it really boils down to helping men on that path, helping on the journey of self-awareness so that you can answer questions like what's my ikigai, what's my purpose, what's my path, what makes me come alive. It's that self-awareness that seems to be the unlock for everything else. All their chronic illnesses we've talked about, the loneliness issue that guys seem to have a big challenge with, and the lack of a sense of purpose is a big one. So I like how we bookended it with self-awareness.
Awesome.
We'll wrap it up here. We wish we had 2 more hours with you, but we know you've got places to be. So Dr. Spar, thank you for your time. You were as informative as you were inspiring. I know every one of us is left with a little nugget of a short-term and a long-term goal. Audience, thank you for listening. I apologize if we didn't get to all of your questions. I know we have so many. I want to let you all know that we hope you tune in a month from now. We have our next Everyman webinar. The details, it's March 19th. So a month from now, also on a Wednesday, also at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific. And our guest for our next Everyman Live will be Kristen Ulmer. Kristen is a thought leader on fear. This is an emotion she's very familiar with because she earned the title of the best woman extreme skier in the world, and she held this title for 12 years. So I hope you come and learn about her relationship and embracing of fear. It'll be exciting to hear from her. But between now and then, I want all of you to go to everyman.com, check out our upcoming programs, retreats, and other member benefits. And we're so grateful that Dr. Spar is a supporter of the work we do. I think to connect back to your book, I can only imagine the whole concept and mission of Everyman helps optimize men's health. Any final words, Dr. Spar, before you go and we head out?
No, just so glad to be here. Thank you so much. It was great. And yeah, can't wait to keep on with Everyman.
Myles,
you.
where can people follow you? What social media account is active for you?
I suck at social media, but probably Instagram. I do Facebook a little bit. Instagram's the main one, just at Dr. Spar. And I'll try and get
Dr. Small.
yeah.
I
Cool.
know we will.
PRSPAR. Yep.
Thanks for joining us, Myles. Good to see you again.
Too. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Travels.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you next month. Take care.